I think the Dixie Chicks had it right when they said that Earl had to die. But this time, the dude's name is John Paul, and his sisters-in-law are right in the middle of it all. Apple TV's series Bad Sisters looks at a dysfunctional family dynamic and what happens when people are pushed to their limits. The tight-knit Garvey sisters have always looked out for each other. When their brother-in-law winds up dead, his life insurers launch an investigation to prove malicious intent and set their sights on the sisters, all of whom had ample reason to kill him. So this is a 10-episode series with weekly releases going into October. Now, because each of the episodes is more than 45-ish minutes, it could feel more like an event each week. And several of the episodes leave us hanging a bit, making us want to find out more about what the mystery that's unfolding is. Now, the show follows 5 sisters that are all drastically different in personality, but the one thing they do share in common is the bond to look after each other. Now, they don't always accomplish this in the most uplifting of ways, but they usually mean well. From the very beginning of the show, there's a mystery that's playing out that's brought about because an insurance agent is skeptical about paying out a life insurance policy. So he begins poking into the death of John Paul, or JP, or the prick. Now, Class Bang plays JP, and wow, this dude exudes terribleness. He is a very easy character to love to hate because in very short succession, we can see how trashy of a human he is. But the worst part is that he's manipulative and sly about his actions. Bang creates such an aura to JP that it was hard not to have visceral reactions every time that he's on screen. His performance is captivating and infuriating. I mean, I liken him a bit to Dolores Umbridge, where I can't take my eyes off of him, but I still want all of the bad things to happen to him because of how much evilness just emanates from him. Now, the sisters are great to watch, but they can become tiresome and they're stuck in a cycle personas. Now, once we get to know each of them, they all remain pretty static throughout the series. Now, that doesn't mean that their antics aren't entertaining, because as we watch many different comedies of errors play out, there is a lot of laughs and cringes to be had. And I like that each of them also has a different facet of their personality that helps to shape their motivations and their behaviors. Sharon Horgan, who is also one of the creators of the show, plays one of the eldest sisters. Now, I love how because of circumstances within her life, she becomes sort of a mother figure to all of her other sisters. She's doting, but she's also somewhat controlling, which then creates all sorts of tension between them, and I think that's pretty entertaining to watch because the others, typically warm up to being mothered by their sister. Anne-Marie Duff is Grace, the sister that's married to the prick, and she's probably got the toughest role in the show as she has to convince us that she's okay with taking the crap that's doled out to her. We keep hoping that as the series goes along, she's going to find her voice and then stand up for herself. But so many times through this, her performance does exactly what it's designed to do, make us pissed off for her and even sometimes at her. Now, I found myself muttering at her on the TV just because I wanted her to not quietly endure JP's behaviors or treatment of her anymore. Eva Berthesel is yet another sister, and while I like the actress, I found her character probably the hardest to connect with. She's fairly internally focused, and there were times where I didn't mind that she was just absent from the group. She's a closed-off character, not giving us much to know about her than what we're really shown. I mean, yeah, we can gain some insight into her mindset simply from her actions, but the character always felt like a stranger to me, only ever getting demonstrative when she was cornered. Sarah Greene plays a one-eyed sister, and funny enough, she stars in this along with her Frank of Ireland co-star Brian Gleeson. Now, I am going to get to him in just a minute. Now, Greene is angry most of the time that we see her, and while there are definite reasons why she should be, especially where JP is concerned, her anger does tend to make her fairly static. Now, she's still fun to watch because of the intensity that's presented, and there are a few moments here and there where she's actually showcasing a softer side to her personality. But more often than not, she's focused, determined, and extremely stubborn. Now, she's not easy to connect with all of the time either, but because of her story, we can sympathize with her. And finally, Eve Hewson plays the youngest sister, and her dynamic with the rest is probably the most engaging, as we can see her mounting frustration as every single one of the sisters tries to mother her. I really enjoyed the snarky attitude that Hewson brings to the character, but also is able to convincingly give us a character who is very capable but appears helpless simply because of how her sisters repeatedly treat her. She's impulsive, but also one of the easiest to connect with. I mean, she's definitely flawed, just like every other character in this show, but she also has a pureness or a naivete to her that just makes her endearing. Now, the main impetus for all of the shenanigans that we watch play out comes from two insurance brothers who are investigating JP's death in the hopes of not having to pay out the claim. Brian Gleeson and Daryl McCormick are so frustrating to watch, especially Gleeson. He is singularly focused, but also really slimy and a hard one to even have the slightest sympathy for. Now, as the show goes along, we get more insight into his life, but it's still not enough that we see to just make him out to be anything but a selfish bully. The dynamic between the brothers is just like that of the dynamic between the sisters. It's explosive, dramatic, and exasperating. Pretty much the entire show is filled with selfish characters. And while the sisters may be looking out for Grace, much of the time their motivations are shaped by their own desires or frustrations. Now, the selfishness does provide a lot of conflict between the characters and for the story, but it does make it hard to root for many of them. Now, for as much mystery that's contained in this, it also has a great deal of dark comedy. And while I wasn't busting a gut laughing through this, there were many times that I was chuckling along or very amused at a situation. I had mentioned earlier about this being a comedy of errors, where a plan starts out feeling like it's solid and then comes apart at the seams, creating a whole new unforeseen mess. Now, as you can imagine, some of it does become predictable in the setup and the execution. And after the first few episodes, there is a subtle formula that's at play within the storytelling. Now, this didn't bother me much because I actually started to look forward to what zany plan would be concocted and then how it could possibly go awry when it came time to execute. I found each of the episodes captivating to watch and was sucked into the actions our characters were getting themselves involved in. So many of them ended with me wanting to watch more. Now, luckily, I was able to binge through the entire thing, but I loved the feeling of anticipation that each episode brought. From a visual standpoint, this show is beautiful to look at. The shots are what you'd expect from a European drama, where we have some intimate shots that allow us to experience a character's actions and emotions from a very close perspective. And then there are plenty of framings where our characters are just minimized in a bottom of corner of the screen in favor of showcasing the beautiful landscapes. The pacing in this is pretty consistent and it moves us through the narrative fairly easily. Now, there are sequences that are taking place in the present, as well as flashbacks to give us the whole context of what went on in the months leading up to JP's death. The back and forth are easy to follow thanks to on-screen visual clues, and both times provide enough detail to make an episode feel full. But also, they don't linger on elements unnecessarily long, which then could cause the show to drag. Now, I was engaged through each episode, and I loved the steady storytelling. Now, even though I said that this felt like an event, with each episode creating enough tension and drama to make one per week satisfying, I think it would be even more satisfying to skip a week or two to create an opportunity for a little binge session a few times throughout the show. Now, I hope that they keep this in, but at the end of the final episode, some characters are jumping into the sea, and when the angle changes, we clearly see the camera crew in the water. Now, it's just there for a very brief second, but I hope Apple doesn't fix it before you get to see it, because I thought it was just a funny goof. So overall, Bad Sisters is an engaging mystery with a cast of characters that are flawed but engaging. And even though many of the characters are static in their trajectories, the ensemble is what makes this so entertaining and watchable. The narrative is a little formulaic and the story does become predictable, but because the villain is so despicable, it's easy to root for his demise, however that may come about. There's sex, nudity, a ton of profanity, and some violence. I give Bad Sisters 4 out of 5 couches. So what's a series with a lot of family dysfunction that you enjoy watching? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.